One thing I'm constantly amazed by is that every time the science proclaims the matter settled, it won't be too much longer after that new evidence comes out to disprove the current narrative. Global warming gets dismissed because of some really cold years, so it turns into climate change. The vaccines are effective. Yeah. Both of those turn out to be 100% wrong after the science had been settled. But Noah's flood? Oh yeah, that science has definitely been settled. Or has it? On today's episode, I have on Nate Richard. Nate comes with some serious cred here. He is a teacher by profession, so it's not like you have to take the word of a clown with a microphone. Nate does a great job of explaining how the flood occurred, as well as gives great evidence for the flood. Now, just a quick side note here, if you have access to YouTube or Rumble, you may be better served to watch this episode there, because Nate uses a lot of pictures on this episode. Get ready to engage the science on this episode of the Mormon Renegade Podcast. So I want to take just a few moments here and just say thank you for listening. I can never tell you how much it means to me that you spend your time here with me. Now, on top of that, last year I received donations that helped me upgrade the audio, equipment, and software. This year I want to do the same thing for video. Now, if you want to help out and make a donation, you can do that by going to MormonRenegade.com and making a donation there. Also, check out the Mormon Renegade supply store at MormonRenegade.com and pick up some merch. Now, if you can't do any of those, I completely understand. It's not like it's been a banner year necessarily for our finances. So maybe just keep the podcast in your prayers. Finally, as I've started to do more video, there's a YouTube channel up for the podcast. But just between you and me, yeah, I ain't going to be there very long because I have a feeling I'm going to get kicked off. So to stay one step ahead of that, I've made a channel on Rumble. So head on over to Rumble, look up the Mormon Renegade podcast channel there, and crush that like and subscribe button. Thank you.
You're listening to the Mormon Renegade Podcast.
Well, Nate, it's good to have you back on, man. How's things been for you?
Super good. Yeah, been listening to your show, and sounds like you always have a fun time on here.
I try. I mean, we deal with some pretty sacred subjects and some pretty important subjects, but I feel like if we can't have a good time doing this, we're probably not doing it right. So, yeah, no, it's been good. So, everything good on your end?
Yeah, wife and kids are happy as they can be, and I'm happy as I can be, and that's good.
Awesome. You know, when we started talking again a few weeks back about you coming back on the podcast, I was intrigued by this idea of being able to prove Noah's flood through science. And maybe it's just because I'm too rational or I'm too over analytical, but my thought is if what we believe is true, we should see evidence of it, right?
Yep.
That's
a problem.
Yeah, and not to take away from faith, because faith is super important, and if you're relying on science to get your testimony, that's a problem. But once you have that faith, I feel like you should be looking for evidences, right? You should be looking for things that bolster that a little bit. So I was super excited to do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, jump on in.
Okay, we'll make this as conversational as you want. It doesn't have to be any one way.
Okay.
This is kind of a mesh of a couple different topics. So there's Noah's flood, and there's there's fossils, evolution, where all the water for the flood comes from, which is not just rain, because there's only the atmosphere is only about enough for 1 inch of rain to cover the whole earth. So we had to have some more water from somewhere else for the flood. So Universal models, what this is based on, and this is the book. It's this first volume is the flood, and this and where the flood water comes from, which is hydroplanet, saying that there's a lot more water under the earth than most people think. And the second volume has a lot to do with the fossils and how that impacts the age of the earth and stuff.
Yeah,
So
and this
yeah,
all ties right back in with the universal model. So at this point, I would encourage anybody who's listening who hasn't listened to the episode I did with Russ Barlow. I did 2 with Russ so far. Go back and well, I think 3, maybe 3. But anyway, go back and listen to those because that's going to give you the groundwork for what we're talking about today.
yeah,
Sorry, Nate.
it's great. Um, okay, let's see. So anyway, when it comes to where the water come from for the flood, so like I said, there's about an inch worth in the atmosphere that could cover the world, but we're talking a worldwide flood that covers mountains. It says that right in the Bible, and we need to honor the Bible as our as the measuring rod for theories and research. Um, Now there may have been some kind of a firmament. People talk about some kind of possible additional water in the sky in the past. I don't know, and Dean doesn't know. Dean Sessions wrote Universal Model, and Dean's focus though is just focusing on what we can prove, what we can look at today. So, um, I think there's compelling evidence that the water came from the rain, but also it says the fountains of the deep broke open.
Right.
And this model gives a new view on what the fountains of the deep are in a really cool way.
Okay.
So, um, yeah, um, I wanted to do like some introductory thoughts on how, let's see, how I had a really bad run-in at BYU with trying to figure this out because BYU, they're all teaching the wrong thing when it comes to evolution.
You
And
mean you
yeah,
mean that BYU that has the majors program, the philosophies of men mingled with scripture? Is that the school you're talking about?
yeah, with uh, a minor in compromise.
Right. Okay. Just
Yeah,
wanted to clear that up. I have a merchandise store on my website, and I'm toying with the idea really hard of just printing up a shirt that says just BYU on the front, and then on the back it says philosophies of men mingled with scripture department, and then run that way.
make sure you wrote something about the biology department on there.
Right. Yep. Yep. Yeah. No,
So,
we should maybe brainstorm on that a little bit.
oh yeah, I've thought a lot about that. One fun one idea I had was keep uh keep the keep the Y in BYU or something like that.
Yeah. Yep.
It's
Yep.
like
Yep. Yeah.
guy
Yeah.
brings
No. No. Absolutely. Around our house, we have a saying: every time the Cougars lose in football, an angel gets its wings. So, I mean,
lose in football. I don't know. I remember when I was on my mission in the southern states, we're at a member's house and he was just, you know, BYU was the you know the Lord's school, and my companion said, "Well, it's not the Lord's school. It's just a school." And this member looks at him with wide eyes and says, "Blasphemy."
nice.
I
Nice.
do I do love BYU. I was there for 6 years, and I um they've got a lot of good stuff going, but it's our job to be gadflies and to let them know when there's something that we're not happy about. So.
Let me ask you this real quick before we dive in here, because I'm interested. I don't think I've had too many people on that have spent that amount of time at BYU. Did you see a change in the time you were there, or did all the change that we start seeing now kind of happen after you left?
I was there from 2013 to 19, and
Oh,
I
so
was
you were
getting
in the thick of it.
I was getting hit hard from the beginning. Yeah, I was. My professors would say, um, and this is, God used evolution, isn't that wonderful? And all the prophets were wrong. My 50 pages of quotes of prophets who said that, organic evolution is contrary to the fall and atonement, and like, yeah, forget about all that, evolution's the only way because the academic journals say so, and scriptures have nothing to do with temporal things. So
How do they
it,
get
it-
away with that, Nate? I've always been curious about that. I never attended BYU, so I don't know what it looks like. But if it's receiving money from Salt Lake, right, church headquarters, how do they manage to pull that off without? I mean, I know Holland came down kind of hard on them a year or so ago, but other than that, there's not a lot that happens from Salt Lake where it's kind of like, hey, get yourself in line.
yeah, I've been wondering that same thing. It's pretty tragic because the it's really obvious that tons of people lose their faith in Christianity when they believe in evolution.
Right.
I had uh it was an astronomy class, and it's a dark room, and so I make my joke that I had this long conversation in a dark smoke-filled room uh with this professor, and she was trying to get me into evolution, and "Hey, isn't it just let it be, like it's so cool, and just allow God to do that." And like, what do you mean allow God to do that? Like the whole purpose
That
of
is a
evolution,
weird thing to say, right? Let God do that.
it's like the whole point of evolution theory is to explain nature without God. That's the
Right.
whole point. Yeah.
Right. From
And
the beginning, Darwin was clear on that.
and yeah, and then the flood, in the church we've seen, everybody loves Hugh Nibley. Hugh Nibley got on the bandwagon of, hey, yeah, it must have been a local flood that just Noah, saw, and maybe it wasn't a worldwide flood. But the whole point of the flood, according to the Bible, was it covered all the mountains. The waters prevailed, 15 cubits, which probably means it was 15 cubits above the mountains. Um, and it says all flesh on the earth died. So, I mean, anyway, and it's, it's obviously everybody around the world has their legend of major flooding, and the more scientists are honest, the more they'll admit it. Um, so 200 years ago, before James Hutton started talking about, you know, evolution, of course, Darwin, Lyell, all those guys, but James Hutton is the guy who we get our magma Earth from.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, people believed the Earth was made in water, like the Bible says, and that makes it a lot easier to comprehend the Earth being flooded. Um, and you look around at all the other planets and moons, and they're basically these big balls of ice and water. And I don't know how far we'll get in with our discussion tonight because there's so much information. I mean, these, yeah, we're anyway. So let's see what else we got here. See if I can. This works. President Nelson, it's encouraging that he doesn't buy into evolution. He says man has always been man. That's just the way genetic works. And then you have to ask the question, well, where did man come from? And that's where the secular world, fails because man came from God. So a real understanding of the of science, when you understand that there's no proof for evolution of species, you have to turn to God. Whether you call God, you know, Jesus or whoever you call him, like there has to be a God. Some way that I explain to, you know, every now and then I'll get to have a private conversation with a student or something where I'll make a suggestion that, hey, um, just try to think of it as, what if we built a spaceship and we, had some really great technology to where we didn't age and we knew how to build really cool stuff and we went over and colonized planets. What's that's not even a stretch anymore to believe that.
Right.
So it's like, hey, God's basically a colonizer. and he brings seeds, he brings animals, he brings people, starts another colony, you know?
So what the one thing I'd say is that term colonizing is a pretty hot button term, right? I mean, if you look at things like the 1619 project, the word colonist isn't a good term, right? And so I wonder if sometimes if some of this isn't a political pushback, right? I mean, if you say God's a colonizer and the left tends to think of colonizers as slave owning rich guys, that I could see where they would get upset at that. I'm not saying that they're right in that assumption, but I guess I can kind of see it a little bit.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, hopefully a benevolent colonizer.
Well,
And yeah,
yeah,
they're
yeah,
not
I
gonna
I
buy it.
don't think there's anything wrong with colonization, right? I think that's how humanity spreads, both through the eternities and on Earth, right? And I don't think colonizing necessarily has to be a an oppressive thing, nor do I think it's always been an oppressive thing, right? I think we talk about a mixing of cultures when you're talking about it in terms of this sphere of existence.
Yeah. Um, let me let's see if I can do a couple of things here. So, I mean, flood in particular, um, that's a little bit later in this. I wonder if I should jump right to it or do some of the background
That's
stuff.
that's completely up to you, big dog. I am fine. Like I told you earlier in the text, we have all the time in the world. All the time you want to spend here, we have it.
All right. Well, I guess if you can hold your buckle your seatbelts, we'll take a little bit of a there's a whole couple hundred page chapter with flood evidences. I feel like this all ties in. So I'll hit on a couple things and give you guys the Reader's Digest version. The cool thing about Universal Model is it's textbook style and it's got tons of quotes in there from academic journals. Um, it's pretty, far as textbooks go, it's pretty easy to read. Um, like me teaching this, I'm not an expert at this. I've been working with Dean and studying and teaching this for a couple years now, but um, it's all kind of right there and it's pretty straightforward. So this is when we talk about flood, we talk about a young earth because the Bible says the flood was 4,500 years ago.
Right.
So um which means there's no time for evolution. If evolution's possible, it's going to take millions of years, right?
Well, yeah, that's the secret ingredient or the key ingredient in all of evolution, right?
Time.
I had a good friend who told me this once that the key to understanding evolution is that somehow the elapsing of millions of years are magical, so it can turn a orange into a Coke can.
Exactly. Yeah, when you're talking millions of years, you're talking fairy tale. Because nobody's seen it, nobody's done it. If you say, well, we just need to wait a million years, it's like, okay, start waiting, you know,
Right.
because nobody's done that before. So if you want to like theorize and tell stories, that's one thing. But if you want to do science, we need to actually prove things. Um, yeah.
So let me ask you this while we're on the subject. What is your opinion of adaptation then? Do you believe that adaptation happens or is it too closely related to evolution?
Adaptation is an obvious reality.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. It's just we've never seen one species cross into another. A
Right.
great example I like to use is the horse and the donkey. You breed them, you make the mule, they can't reproduce anymore because you've crossed a line there.
Right.
So the mule is infertile.
So let me ask you this because people will say, oh, well, we can prove through genetics that we're really closely related to apes. Do we share more genetic code with apes than other animals?
Um, I don't know, but basically, if we're similar to apes in our genetic code, I guess it was Russ pointed out, it's like a doghouse is similar to a house, is similar to a, you know, skyscraper.
Hmm.
They're all houses, but
Right.
yeah,
Okay.
same engineer, you know,
Right.
different models. And the whole importance of it is that humans are, you know, we're the vastly more intelligent creation. We're not of the animal kingdom. We're of the basically God kingdom, you know.
Right.
So when you try to blur that, that's when morals get involved. That's why Satan loves science um and evolution, because he can then say, well, you're an animal, so it's not a big deal if you go do and act like an animal. So
Right.
we've been breeding dogs for thousands of years, and we still haven't made a non-dog. um
I don't
Law of
know.
reversion,
I think a
yeah.
golden. I think a golden doodle is pretty close to a non-dog.
Yeah,
I'm
there's
just
definitely
I'm
plenty of
just
business
I'm
dogs.
just saying there's a few dog breeds I have a rough time calling a dog, but we'll
Yeah.
we'll go with your argument, Nate.
Okay. There's also reversion, which is that if you leave dogs or whatever you've artificially bred alone to itself in nature, they'll go back to their original stock, so to say. They'll unspecialize themselves and go back to the natural stock. Um, so yeah, we have this tree of life where see if I can make my mouse into a highlighter. There we go. So this outer ring has names because those are all the species we know. But the inner rings that are supposed to connect them into a common ancestor, they don't have names because they haven't been discovered, because they probably don't exist.
Dude,
Um,
that's nuts. So like the majority of species that we say have evolved into another species, we don't have scientific proof for.
yeah, yep.
Holy cow.
Missing the common ancestors. And that's what everybody is out pulling their hair trying to do, is find the common ancestors. And they lie about it. You know, they make forgeries. I think I have an example. So if you have a bunch of people, here's some ape people for you, right?
Right.
Some of the half monkey, half humans. So when they found these bones, they didn't have hair on them, they didn't have a skin color. So this is all a makeup job, you know?
Right. And
Uh,
there's no way for them to know that either.
no. Another thing is, when you're dealing with evolution, the scientists will admit that it's not like, oh, really deep, we've got the monkey. More shallow, we've got the half monkey. And then towards the surface, we have the bones of the human. It, they want you to believe that there's this nice, gradual, things are getting more and more complex in the fossil record, but that's not reality.
Right.
Um, the reality is that most fossils are toward the surface of the earth. In the top foot, you find the fossils when you're excavating to build something, or within the top 70 feet, um, such as the Bingham Canyon mine. It's a mile deep. The only place they found fossils is in the very top 70 feet. Why would fossils only be towards the surface? It's because
Mm,
it was a recent event and it was a one-time event.
mm,
And that event was the flood. This is the thing about fossils and the flood. Fossils aren't being made right now. Fossils are a special thing. It's a bone that's turned into a rock. But if you go outside right now, you're not going to find any half fossils that are in the process of transitioning from bone into rock, because the conditions for it aren't happening. So fossils, really, a true understanding of fossils is a evidence of the flood. The flood made the
right.
fossils, because normally when something dies, it decays, it gets scavenged, and it's not turning into a rock. What you need to turn it into a rock is a tremendous amount of pressure and hot water that's going to drive minerals into that bone to make it a rock. And that just doesn't happen every day. So the cool thing about universal model is Dean's done some experiments where he's taken the height of about 5 miles, is about how tall our tallest mountains are. And how much water pressure would that be? It would be about 13,000 psi. So that's our magical ingredient for pressure. And so he gets his autoclave and this water and plays with the pressure to get this pressure. And he has taken pieces of wood and turned them into rocks. In other words, petrified wood.
Wow.
So he's found, and it's about 750 degrees Celsius is the heat you need. And you could ask, where did the heat come with the flood waters? That's from the Earth's plates rubbing together,
Right.
friction heating. So I have some pictures of it we'll maybe get to, but fossils don't just happen every day. You need a very specific recipe to make fossils. So let's see here. You also have fossils that look a lot like the same. So here we have fossils of, crawfish, wasp, ferns, and they all look just like their modern day counterparts. But if these are millions of year old fossils, which they claim the fossils are that old, these should have evolved by now. Because they say humans evolved in just 2,000 generations. So why haven't these guys evolved? Also, there's bacteria, 45,000 generations later, it hasn't evolved. It's still bacteria. So,
And that's been one of the things about the theory of evolution that's always kind of sat with me wrong, right? Were two things. One is that we should expect to see, even before our eyes, certain amounts of evolution taking place, and we just don't see it. If evolution is for real, then for the most part, it seems like it stopped, right? I mean, certainly people can adapt and change based on their environment, and so can animals. And you can do things like selective breeding and that sort of thing with animals, but we don't see that. You know what I mean?
oh yeah, I heard a really funny this comedian was talking about evolution. He's like, so if the monkeys evolved into humans, why do we still have monkeys? Are those just like the retarded monkeys that can...
To be fair,
So,
Nate, I have met a couple of people that's really challenged me on my beliefs, because I'm like, yeah, you might just be a generation away from dragging your knuckles. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, but I'm just playing. Anyway, yeah, no, I agree with you wholeheartedly.
hmm so another thing is they're always finding these, half monkey, half human skeletons, right? But actually they're usually just pygmy skeletons or skeletons of monkeys. Um, they do all kinds of shenanigans. They'll find a there was this one case where it was a tooth of a pig, and they said that was the missing link. There was this other case where there was I don't know, I don't think I have the slide here. Oh yeah, I do. That was the tooth of the pig was the Nebraska man. There was the Piltdown man, which was the jawbone of an orangutan with fragments of a modern human skull. And these things are stuck in your textbooks for decades until they finally get exposed. Hilton Man, broken teeth filed down to fool people. And the famous Lucy was discovered 2 weeks before he ran out of grant money to find the missing link for evolution. That researcher was on an errand to figure that out, and thankfully he did right before his time was up.
That's crazy that it was just a couple weeks before the money ran out. I'm shocked.
And with Lucy, and these pygmies, we've found bones that are basically the same as Lucy, and they're in this cave, but they're bones, not fossils, which means they're fresh. And it's close to this pygmy village, and it's like there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of things that are just showing more and more fraudulent stuff here. Obviously, there was a time when Harold B. Lee was asked about Neanderthals. He said, "Have you forgotten the scripture?" And he quoted Moses 3:7. I, Lord, formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul, the first flesh upon the earth, the first man also. Kind of like the Lord repeated himself like 3 times in that verse just to make sure we'd get it. Anyway, Bruce McConkie was really good at throwing down against evolution. So read him. Yeah, Book of Alma, Book of Second Nephi. Man in the beginning was created in the image of God, and you know they must have remained forever um, in the state in which they were created, as they would have had no children. These are the conditions that existed before the fall, and it's crazy the mental gymnastics people will do to try and be pro God and Adam, and yet pro you know uh evolution. They'll come up with all kinds of crazy stuff, and I don't think we need to go there. And I have a testimony that we don't need to go there. What do you think?
No, I think you're right. And I think there's a danger in going in there, right? I think this idea that, if man evolved from monkeys, you take away the thing that makes us unique, right? And you all of a sudden, man isn't so much a sentient thinking being who has the gift of consciousness and this idea of being able to connect with his creator. If you can take those underpinnings out of who man believes they are, then man is just another animal within the animal kingdom. And as such, your behavior can reflect that somewhat. I make the connection that once we went with evolution, we started to devalue life. And I think that opens up the doors to some pretty nasty things, right? I think the stuff we saw come out of certainly the Third Reich in Germany during World War II. I think the way we look at people now, abortion, euthanasia, all those things, I think are the natural outgrowths of this idea that, man's just another animal within the animal kingdom. Because if we're not different, then really, is there any more significance to putting down a unwanted human than there is in putting down an unwanted dog?
Right.
I think there's all
this
sorts of nastiness that goes along with this.
Yeah. And it really opens the doors to you know taking the whole Bible and just setting it on the shelf because we're past that.
Right.
um, and it makes it so that we question whether the flood was real, and whether the second coming of Christ is real, and whether salvation is real. So it really puts a javelin in the heart of religion. Um, you could definitely make a case that it's the devil's religion in a way.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Um, so James Hutton, um, 2 Peter 3 says, in the last days, people say, where is the promise of his coming? Since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. So this is called uniform theory, which says that there's no catastrophes allowed. The flood, though, was a big catastrophe, and it changed everything. And why would God use a big catastrophe? It's because he wanted there to be no mistake that he was involved. But when people downplay the reality of that event, then they can downplay the reality of God's involvement with our lives. So the fact of the flood being worldwide and not just a little, carnival ride that Noah went on, it's got big implications. Just gonna skip some of this. So the flood, one of the big ideas is that the Grand Canyon was deposited by the flood. So with the flood, we've got all kinds of pipes all around the earth that are shooting out massive amounts of sand and mud and water and maybe some lava, and that that this Grand Canyon was laid down, the layers were laid down and fairly rapidly, and then the whole canyon, it's on a fault line,
Hmm.
and so the whole canyon split in an earthquake. Now, part of the reason we can make this claim is because the Grand Canyon is missing a bunch of things that should be there if this layer was laid down and then a million years passed. Don't you think some vegetation would grow and some animals would show up? Um, but or maybe some coal would form, or so we're missing all this stuff in the Grand Canyon. Okay. Um, the National Park Service website says, quote, no one has ever found a fossilized reptile skeleton or bone within the Grand Canyon. Fossil footprints were left by more than 20 species of reptiles and amphibians, but no teeth or bones. Basically, you're not finding any real fossils in the Grand Canyon. And that would mean that it wasn't just something that was built slowly layer by layer. Okay.
Okay.
You also have a few other things. One side of the canyon is, gosh, what was the number? Like 1,000 feet higher than the other side. Big evidence of that there was an earthquake involved. Standard theory is that it was a river that carved this out. But there's a lot of problems with that. Again, the missing layers, missing fossils, missing sediments, missing topsoils between the layers is a big problem.
So you're coming to these conclusions not based off of anything like radiocarbon dating, but more like, okay, if there's a pattern that seems to be at play here, which some of these scientists who favor evolution have kind of pinned their whole theory on, which is you can go through these layers, these different strata, and find, you should expect to find these kind of animal fossils within this strata, and then a million years later you should find this kind of plant life within this strata, and in the Grand Canyon you don't see that at all. Am I understanding correct, Nate?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Um, yeah, around the world, there's only a small bit of soil that's topsoil. You don't find that same kind of soil in between the different layers, which there should be,
Right.
if those layers were set down a long time away from each other.
Right.
Mm. And you can actually do calculations based on how fast that topsoil is building with the organic material on the surface. And you can trace it back to it starting around 4,500 years ago,
Right.
which is flood time.
Gotcha.
So the sediment that we're walking around on today, it's all flood sediment. As far as mountains go, a lot of the mountains were made in the creation. We have a spiritual teachings on that in the church.
Okay.
Um,
Let me stop you there real quick, because there's something I need clarification on. You
okay.
said all the soil we walk around today, that we walk around on today, is flood soils.
Yeah, so flood soils would mean soils that were um, basically shot up from under the earth through big conduits or fountains at the time of the flood.
So
And
how do we know that that's where these soils came from?
um, well, some we'll get into more of that
Okay.
um, when we look at the different fountains.
Okay.
And we look at the nature of the worldwide nature of the flood. So you've got things like granite that were probably before the flood, like the Grand Tetons of Idaho. Those are granite. They have no fossils in them. Granite typically has no fossils in it, and so that was in the creation. There wasn't any animals at the very beginning of the creation, right?
Right.
So you've got some of these things that were made at the creation, but everything was kind of mixed up at the flood. That's
Okay.
there's kind of two things that were going on at the flood. Things were getting mixed up, and a lot of stuff was getting sprouted out from underneath the ground. And we'll look at different locations where like White Sands Monument, just all this white sand in the middle of nowhere, where it's all surrounded by different colors of soil, and we try to think of where that white sand come from. Was it from a, a mountain of the similar color that eroded from? There's no mountain of similar color around. Or did a river maybe carry it to that location and there's no river around? So the answer is that it came from underneath the earth. So we find time after time places where there's this discolored soil deposit that had to have come from beneath the earth.
So let
And
me ask you this: when let's say, because we've mankind has done a ton of stuff, right? Mining, fracking, directional drilling, all those other things. In those processes, have we been able to pull out soils that would match the kind of soils we walk around on today?
so topsoil worldwide is only in the top layer, basically. And there's not, I mean, we have like coal. Um, so
Okay,
you've probably driven in Utah to Price, where there's that big,
right,
long, stark uh, coal right there.
right.
Um, so when these layers are getting put down, they're, you know, they're, uh, there's sweeping waters coming in and making that coal really rather quickly. And then another layer gets deposited on top of that from uh, continued stuff coming up from under the ground. And we can make coal in a laboratory in, a matter of hours. Um, so that's another thing that's in the text is, synthetic coal that resembles natural coal, that's indistinguishable from natural coal.
Okay.
So,
I'm not trying to be argumentative. I'm just trying to understand here, Nate. So,
mhm.
but my thought is that if you said that a lot of the topsoil that we walk around on today comes from beneath the earth through those
Well, no,
fountains that burst forth,
I'm saying
right?
the topsoil that we're walking around on has been building up since the flood. This is 4,500 years.
Okay.
Like that top like foot or so of soil that's different
Okay.
than the other soil.
Right.
That's been building up over the past 4,500 years since the flood. And that the
Okay.
stuff underneath that was deposited at the time of the flood, and that we haven't had any major event
Okay.
since the
Now I
flood
see.
to make, you know, another deposit or another mix up.
Okay. All right. That makes
Haven't
sense. I thought you were saying that all the soil we walk around today that we walk around on today were products of what was shot out of those fountains of the deep, so to speak. And my thought was, well, if that's the case, then we should be able to drill down and find similar soils. But if what you're saying is that's accumulated after the flood, that topsoil accumulated after the flood, then that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, basically the after you go down past the topsoil, you have something completely different.
Okay.
And it's just one of the evidences that, if you calculate how long it takes to build up that topsoil for organic material every year, um, you can measure that to be that that distinct type of stuff that's building up on the top has been doing that for 4,500 years. And before that, it's something completely different,
Right.
which indicates that the floodwaters came through and destroyed everything, um, and that we've been building again since the flood.
Okay. All right. Nope, that makes sense.
Yeah. I might have a picture somewhere, but um, yeah. Let's see here. Let me go. I'm trying to find typical, you know, typical theory on fossilizations that something will die. More and more scientists are admitting that flooding is involved with dinosaur extinction. Um, Sometimes they'll only give it like a minor flood, and they'll say it kind of sat there in the water for a while, was buried, and then eventually turned into, magically turned from a bone into a rock. But in reality, this doesn't happen. Bones just don't turn into rocks. We talked about that a little bit. Um, Earth's surface does not contribute silica saturation much above 6 parts per million in typical groundwater. At such a low concentration, only microscopic quartz crystals could form, which is not enough to even cement grains together.
Hmm.
So um, the we're just not seeing the proper amount of pressure and silica to be doing this in everyday natural things.
Gotcha.
We also find soft tissue, um, like dinosaur eggs, jellyfish fossils, feather fossils. According to Darwin, fossils take a really long time to make, and so soft things can't be preserved. But if you had a catastrophic event, it was a big event, then you can make stuff like this. You can preserve, even you've got footprints, fossilized footprints. Now, normally, if we walk through the mud, you're going to get some rain or something that's going to wash our footprints away. But
Right.
if there was a catastrophic event that pulled in just the right amount of water, heat, and pressure, you can take these soft things and convert them quickly into a rock.
Okay.
Yeah. So, another interesting thing about that is the Mount St. Helens eruption in 1980. They thought, oh, this is a really great case study. We're gonna, see the beginnings of fossils being made because a big theory is that mud from volcanoes is what traps animals and plants and fossilizes them.
Right.
But the trees from Mount St. Helens, those are all decaying, and give it a few years, there won't even be any trees left over that were trapped in that mud because they're all decaying. So if we say wait a million years, we can't wait a million years because everything will be gone.
Okay.
So
So it makes no sense that um, these fossils that are of vegetation would be around because they would have decayed before the process of fossilization would have taken place unless it was a cataclysmic event that had a lot of heat behind it as well.
yeah, exactly. And the
Okay.
picture is actually right here. So there's two scenarios. We can compare a scenario where we don't have petrified wood, like Mount St. Helens eruption, and where we do, like the Yellowstone standing petrified forest. So
Mhm.
Mount St. Helens eruption, 1980, these things are already decaying away. There's pretty quick, there's not gonna be anything left. So forget about fossilizing those because they're history. But why do we have petrified trees in other places? It's because those were made during the flood. That
Okay.
is where we did have that, 13,000 psi, that 750 degrees Celsius, you know, underwater to where that could happen. Also, underneath the ground, you've got mineralizers, these pipes that are shooting out the minerals necessary to turn these wood and bones into rocks.
Okay. So let me ask you this: Have we found any of those tubes that shot that water out during the flood?
Absolutely. Um, I have some of that later. Let's see. Let me fast track to.
Sorry, I'm making you
I
jump
know.
around.
No, it's good. I been through this like a billion times, so I actually know where it is. But I understand watching this can give somebody a seizure.
That's all right. If you're not getting a seizure, I haven't done my job. So
Okay. You've got things like this. Um, these rock pipes. There's actually some compelling evidence that these are remnants of fountains. I'll show you a few pictures and then I'll explain.
okay.
So we've got Monument Valley, Arizona. Um, here's pedestal formations. Um, and in some of these, you can see a little opening, a concave little opening in the
Right.
top of the pillar formation, where it does almost look like a pipe itself right there. Um, Here's some more. This one it's like a pipe cracked in half. You can see the concave interior there. Um, and even big things. These could be at the Badlands Mud Fountain. Um, so again, I'm going to show you a few pictures and then we'll go back and give a little more of the why. Here's these clastic dikes. They can be when material is coming up and out, not just
Okay.
lava though. If it was lava, the surrounding walls would have been most likely more melted as well. In some cases, but not all. Let me show a few more of these. Let's see here. Yeah, Capitol Reef. Um, there's the Monument Valley, Arizona itself could be one big hydro fountain pipe remnant. Um, there's uh there's a couple that are, in the ocean where you'll see these little island circle. I don't think I put a picture of it on here. And some deep caves that are cylindrical caves,
Right.
um, where you could have that as a hydro fountain as well. Uh,
Gotcha. And
this is the yeah, sorry.
no, you're good. I'm just going to ask another question here. What lends itself to this idea that those formations you showed us were pipes? Are they hollow on the inside? What lends itself to that credence other than their shape?
Let me talk about a few things on that. So, basically for these pillars, one thing is that they're a different color than their surrounding sediment.
Right.
So this one you can see it's kind of a white color when the surrounding soils and rocks are like red. So why is this white? It's because it came from underground, and what's underground is actually a lot of microbes. When we understand that underneath the earth is a lot more water than most of us have thought, we understand that there is the possibility, and it's not so shocking what they're finding, that there's all these microbes down there, and the microbes interacting with things, different species exist at different temperatures, and different colors are created based on which species of microbes are involved. So here you've got this white pillar, and so what happens is there's an underwater eruption. Um, what we suggest triggered the flood of Noah was a comet that's going nearby the Earth, which throws off the balance of the gravity force pushing in on us and the centrifugal force, which is going outward from our spinning. And that made the continents basically crack and buckle and go underneath the water, kind of like a baptism of the continents. Anyway, with all this cracking, this is where you've got obviously, the plate boundaries, the ring of fire, um, but you've got these pipes where the stuff is shot out, and because of what's getting shot out is at a higher temperature and pressure, it's going to solidify while surrounding stuff can erode more easily, and what's left over is this pipe that's sticking out.
Okay.
And you see that in a lot of different places.
Now, have we
Um,
been able to spot like the rest of the pipe that's under the ground?
I don't know. I was actually thinking about that today. I don't know if people are like so scared of ruining this cool thing that they don't want to dig around it.
Well,
I
there's like
uh,
GPR and stuff, right? You don't need to dig.
okay.
So
I
I
don't
was
know.
just curious if those, because if those formations continue subsurface, I think it's a dead giveaway, right?
Well, we definitely know about, big old salt plugs, right? That just
Mm-hmm.
go on forever and ever. That are these big old columns of salt formations.
Right.
Again, back at the Kennecott mine, we've got the ore bodies that we're digging out. They're all in vertical formations. Okay.
Hmm.
I might have a picture of that. You see. Let's see. Kennecott mine. Where are we? Well, I don't think I'm gonna find it right now, but
You're an honest guy. I can take your word for it.
no, the ore bodies are in vertical deposits. So it's like here's this deposit, and over here is this deposit, and there are these vertical things to where those were created in the flood too. Yeah,
Okay.
and so
I want to go back to something else you said. It brought up another question. So you think that the flood happened because, I shouldn't say because, but maybe God caused a comet to come by and it threw off kind of the spin and the centrifugal force, and that caused those fountains of the deep to kind of give way. Is that right?
yeah, and one of the scriptural evidences for that is that it says that in the last days it'll be like the days of Noah, right?
Right.
So what do we know about the last days? You read the book of Revelation, it's pretty obvious that there's some kind of, comet or something, right?
Right.
Involved. So I
So
personally think that's a good connection to where we can say, yeah, the days of Noah probably involved that too.
sure, let me ask you this question. We know that we can model what the sky looked like thousands of years ago because the for the most part everything keeps its orbit pretty good, right? That's why we can predict things like eclipses and when comets pass and that sort of thing. Is this a comet that we can model going backwards and say, oh, it was that comet that came too close? Or is this a stray object that kind of flies through the solar system?
Um, if I recall, I think they do make a theory for which specific comet it is
Okay.
in the text, but I don't remember.
No, no, that's good. I was just curious if that was something that had been modeled. If
Yeah.
but it sounds like that work's been done. And you said that can all be found in the universal model textbook.
Yep. Every
Okay.
all these pictures I'm showing, all of this, all these ideas, like 95% of these ideas,
Mm-hmm.
um, are universal model. Yeah.
Okay.
Dean has a little diagram of some of the flood mechanics as far as the comet stuff goes. Show you a picture of that. So the idea is, you've got the two forces in balance of gravity and centrifugal force, and then a comet nearby throws off the spin just enough to where the gravity force is stronger, which
Right.
makes it so the continents submerge. Now, you could say, what do you mean the continents submerge? Because under the crust, in other words, under the continents is what? Well, mainstream idea is that it's some kind of plastic magma. And we'd all get roasted. But this wasn't a roasting, this was a bath. Um, this was a baptism. Um, because scientists agree that the continents are floating on something, in other words, magma, and that the ocean crust, it's a lot thinner, but it's also floating on magma. But
Right.
we suggest that they're floating on more of a water and rock and ice. That
Okay.
instead of 99% of water being in the oceans, you flip that on its head, you've got 1% of water in the ocean and all the rest, not all the rest, but the majority of water being underneath the crust.
Okay.
Mm. And scientists are saying already, they're like, hey, just 400 kilometers down, we probably have enough water to refill the oceans hundreds of times. So
Yeah.
they're admitting a lot of this. Now, to get some context, our crust on the continents is, 36 kilometers, and our crust on the ocean floor is, so we've got about 2.5 miles of ocean, and then you've got 6 kilometers of ocean floor.
Right.
So even in that just first 400, I believe it was 400 kilometers, you've got just this epic amount of water. So when the Bible says that the fountains of the deep all broke open at the flood of Noah, it's like this one little sentence, but it's like a huge deal when it comes to how the flood happened. Yeah.
So back
So,
one other question. You said that the continents submerged. It's my understanding that before Noah's flood, it was just one continent, right?
right. There's a
Okay.
lot of evidence that um, in the Earth's history, the continents were one continent, and you know, and then at the time of the flood, when this comet passes, um, the buckling, the crust going down in under the water, it also snaps the
Okay.
continents. And um, I like to make a couple of gospel analogies. You've got the seven continents. You've got, it's uh, you know, the seven wounds of the atonement. You've got 7,000 years. Um, you've got the gathering of Israel, which is about bringing the Lord's people back together and back into a righteous state of existence. And we've got prophecies that the continents will come back together too, right?
Okay. No, that makes sense.
Anyway, I like to think of it as the continents got baptized not just by sprinkling of rain, but by immersion. So,
Right. Right.
um,
No, you can see the symbolism there. Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. So, and we also have in Latter-day Saint theology, we've got the earth's going to die and it's going to be resurrected, and obviously the earth was created or born, and there's a lot of really cool stuff that we have for doctrine that makes it so that if the earth wasn't baptized, it's like that would be, it's easy to believe that the whole entire earth was baptized because of our theology about the nature of the living earth.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So now the heat that you were talking about that it takes to create fossilization, is that just is the thought that water coming out was superheated? Because we know that there are places, where water comes out of the earth at an extremely hot temperature, right?
Right.
I mean, that's where we get things like, hot springs and that sort of stuff. Is that kind of what the illusion is there, that it would take heat, and is that the source of that heat, that it's heated water from under the ground?
So there's a couple things going on there. Um, for starters, yeah, you've got geysers today that you don't want to touch because it's really hot. And you've got, these natural hot springs. The source of all that heat has to be from somewhere. And the answer that um, that modern science has is that it's from a giant ocean of magma that comes up to visit the surface every now and then when it
Right.
wants to. But the answer that that we propose is that there's frictional heating, sufficient of plates of rocks rubbing together.
Okay.
That a lot of this stuff is by fault lines,
Okay.
and that we have earthquakes um, that generate 50,000 degrees Celsius heat,
Wow.
and all you need to melt rock is 12,000 degrees. So
Right.
an earthquake, you know, billions of tons of rock having a fight, like it's a no-brainer that that can create melted rock, in other words, lava. So not only lava, but heat for um, as a necessary part of the recipe for these fossils.
Gotcha.
Let's actually talk a little bit about um, so we make a really big claim that with the the reason that people think that there's magma is this massive oceans of continuous magma in the earth is because you know they saw lava coming out of a volcano and they say, oh well, I guess that's what's down there, lava. However, local friction can create that lava.
Right.
uh, I want to see if I can show you a picture of that. Yes. So this diagram here, these are a couple drawings, but we'll get into a couple pictures as well. Where you've got two big old slabs of Earth's rock sliding, and when they do, you bet that's enough uh, temperature to liquefy that rock.
Huh.
Also, you've got all kinds of aquifers going on to where when you have this heat, it's gonna vaporize the water, and some of the magma is getting vaporized, mostly the water. And of course, when you vaporize something, it expands 1,700 times. So that's going to be what helps it shoot up to the surface.
Okay. That
We
makes
have
sense.
evidence of frictional welding, where you can um, rub two metals together in a fraction of a second and weld them. You've got lava flows along fault lines. Lots of evidences for local creation of um, of lava. 'Cause this is the thing. When you have, this water Earth, this water planet, it's a piece of cake to consider a flood covering the whole Earth. But if you've got a planet that's mostly lava, you try to think of it being covered in water, and it's like, I don't think so. You know,
Gotcha.
the water Earth isn't like the most important thing ever. Like, let's say this model is wrong, and that there really is a continuous, magma underneath the crust of the Earth. It wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't lose my testimony and say the flood never happened and evolution's true and all this. But we have to realize the connection that modern science makes with their magma Earth and with their agendas. If you've got a magma Earth, for one, you probably can't have a flood based on our current understanding of how things work. For two, if you've got a magma Earth, you've got radiometric dating, and you can have your 4.5 billion-year-old Earth because you're measuring things based on when they were supposedly melted and then calculating how old the Earth is. But if the Earth was not formed as a big molten fireball, as is depicted in certain religious locations that we know of, if that's not really a thing, um, you know, it's
Right.
kind of sad. It's sad to see that. Um,
Did that drive you nuts the first time you saw it?
oh my gosh.
I'll
Yeah.
bet you I bet you just squirmed a little bit, didn't you?
'Cause, yeah, I mean, for one thing, the book of Genesis says the world was made out of water. The Spirit of God moved over the face of the waters, and then the continents are what happens next. There's a couple different theories on that, how that could happen. Uh, One of them is precipitation. If you have just the right, it can either a chemical change or a pressure change, and you can get a solid to precipitate out of a liquid. So what was in this primordial, water soup that, maybe could have uh, had some solids precipitate out of it? I know the Egyptians talk about the beginning being water, and then the continents rise up out of the water.
Right.
Um, so the water creation of the earth is actually a really big deal. Um, and one of the cool things is when you're in zero gravity, like they on the in the space station, they'll spray out some water from their canisters, and it'll form this little orb. And
Right.
if you haven't seen that, go watch some videos on YouTube of it. It's just really breathtaking, especially
I
when
did
you.
I did see a YouTube video on that, and every time water comes out, it doesn't like split apart. It naturally wants to kind of just um adhere together, and it forms this sphere. I don't know how else to
Yeah,
describe it. It's just a ball.
yeah. I have a picture at the beginning of this somewhere, but I get lost in all these pictures. I think it's at the beginning. And I'm gonna explain some common arguments against that.
Okay.
It's at the beginning. Yeah, here it is. So we'll
Yeah.
make this sphere. So this is zero gravity. What it's not, however, is zero air, because obviously that astronaut is breathing air. So
Right.
now let's take it outside of the spaceship and, the space station. And what's going to happen then? Well, when there's no air, okay, let's try it on Earth first. You take a container, a vacuum container, and you suck all the air out. What does water do? It's such a low pressure that it will start to boil. Okay.
Mm,
So now you take that boiling water and it's at a room temperature. Now you put it in space, which is very cold. Okay. Now it's not necessarily going to just freeze into ice in space. It can actually be in a liquid form as well.
huh.
And, we've got um, measurements on, um, you know, suffice to say, there's a lot of water in space, more than people think. There's kind of two ways to demonstrate that the Earth is a water Earth. One of them is like we've been talking about, explaining how lava can be made locally. And well, there's a lot of ways actually, but another one is looking at other moons in the solar system, other planets, and looking at how much water, NASA admits. There's these, 100-mile deep ocean on this moon that's smaller than our moon, and our ocean's only 2.5 miles deep. We've got tons of water on Mars. It's ice water, of course, but um, those are really interesting too.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. So as far as like Earth being created, um, I also think that um, Noah's Ark is a cool analogy of how maybe life got to this Earth. How Noah's ship, it carries the life to start the new world, right?
Right.
And some kind of transportation happened. I don't know how, but somehow we got the seeds here, we got the people here, we got the animals here, and perhaps we even brought seed crystals. You might know what a seed crystal is. It's a small crystal that you put in a supersaturated solution, and when it's in there, the um uh the then liquid stuff that's in that supersaturated solution will attach to the seed crystal and grow. So that could be, throw some of those bad boys in there, and maybe that's how we're starting to get uh some land masses forming in the earth in the beginning.
Okay.
It's just one possibility. Some people also talk about, uh accumulation of debris uh into a water body. If you have the problem with normal accretion theory is it's like throwing two rocks at each other and expecting them to join.
Right.
So that's a really wacky theory. Um, Basically, what the more you get into this, the more astounding it is to find out how wrong so many of our theories are in modern science. And it's half depressing and half exciting. The depressing is I've been lied to my whole life. Or in other words, at least we're complete idiots. The other half, the exciting part is, you know, the new true way makes so much more sense, so much easier to understand. It, it is inherently theistic, it's inherently, religious.
So let me ask you this. Do you think it was a case of you were really lied to? Or do you think that this was just a narrative and a theory that people glommed onto that was just perpetuated?
Definitely the teachers and you know, oh, I think most people are just duped. But
Right.
I definitely believe that, you know, there's there's two supernatural powers in the universe. There's supernatural good and supernatural evil. There's God and there's the devil. And to perfectly pull this off, this theory that's bought into by everyone, and you're thought to be a crazy if you don't believe it. These anti-God sciences, that had to have supernatural evil involved to get it believed and to get it taught.
Right.
Another another important thing is that if you have righteous people, let's say this with a grain of salt, but if you have a righteous scientist, he's going to be led to insights from the Holy Ghost, which are true science. If you have a wicked scientist, he's going to be smart, but he's going to be feeding off the wrong source of information. And you look at the life of Darwin and some of these guys, and they, um, you know,
Okay,
not
so
not
let me push on that just for a second here, Nate, because we know that some early LDS apostles were very much in favor of evolution, Talmage being one of them.
Oh yeah, Talmage, Woodsoe, Irene Senior wasn't an apostle, but yeah. So that's why I said with a grain of salt, because there's obviously righteous people who, it's like so entrenched. It's kind of like, you think of the children growing up at the time just before the flood happened, when all that sodomy was going on, when all that, godlessness was going on. It's like, how much of a chance did those children have to get it right? You know?
Right.
So then God has to come in and hit the reset button because nobody has a chance anymore. And I think we're almost to that point where we need to hit the reset button again. I mean, God does, and He's promised that He will, not by a flood, but by a fire. Um, because you have sincere people now who are, you know, the brainwashing, the indoctrination that's happened, the corrupting of the sciences, it's happened so thoroughly that it's pretty rare that you'll, cutting edge true science that's really rare. And you try to get it published in an academic journal and it's a vertical wall. If what you want published is not mainstream, it's not going to happen.
Right.
So let me see if we can talk about a few more things. um let's go. Hmm, there's uh yeah, there's like an epic amount of things we could talk about on, you know, first off, proving that it's a water Earth. Second off, proving a flood. Maybe I'll jump over to some more. I'll just say, um, come back and visit again later. Get the book, or I have some PowerPoints up online as well, richardsonstudies.com, that breaks down some of this. 3 or 4 PowerPoints that you can go start to get familiar with some of the concepts. Um, So let's assume that we've demonstrated that we have a water-based Earth. Um, I, I guess another proof is that 90% of the rocks are quartz-based. And if Earth started out as a melt, you you wouldn't have quartz, you would have glass. So how do we make glass?
You
It's
superheat sand and that, right?
Yeah, you got to melt it. But how do you make quartz? So natural quartz rocks, you can't superheat them or they lose a lot of their inherent properties, like their piezoelectric properties, where they'll generate an electrical charge if they're compressed. Um, so there's also the crystalline structure that exists in quartz that doesn't exist in glass. That's one of the many proofs that the Earth didn't start out as a melt. There's, then you got to get into explaining how there's not an iron core, and if there's not an iron core, where do we get our magnetic field around the Earth? These are all very important questions that have answers, but we don't have time to get into them. I want to do a little more flood talking.
Yeah, I do too. I got some
Yeah,
questions.
yeah. But yeah, you've got these projections that NASA has based on um, how much water is on some of these other moons and such, that gives us a lot more water to work with. Um, we've got remember how we talked about hydro fountains?
Right.
Well, this is Enceladus. This is a picture that we were able to get where it exploded this um, cannon of water that was, you know, like as big as the thing itself. In other words, this thing was full of water and not so much
Whoa.
anymore because there it went. So when we're talking about hydro fountains, we've never seen flood scale hydro fountains because we haven't had a major flood in 4,500 years, but we are seeing similar things happening on other worlds, other moons and such.
So we're seeing this theory that you have, this idea that we sit on a water planet being played out on moons and other planets within our solar system, and somehow we think that our planet is absolutely unique and completely different than every other planet out there. Is that kind of the drive?
Absolutely, yeah. When you look at the other planets and moons, you it almost looks like they're trying to make our Earth the exception to the rule. Yeah.
Hmm. And I
And
think it's important to note that evolution does kind of the same thing too, right? Look, most everything kind of starts out good or starts out kind of perfect, and then it deteriorates with time, right? Evolution seems to kick that in reverse.
yeah. Um, let's see here. There's a lot of water in rocks, 30% in opal. Um, we have rocks that have water trapped inside them, called anhydros, just more evidence of a watery environment for their formation.
Yeah, Russ told me a lot about that. That was super fascinating.
Let me let me fast track a little bit to get to some more flood stuff. So you asked where are these hydro fountains? And part of the answer is a lot of the things that we think are impact craters are actually hydro fountains. Um, so what I mean by that is a lot of these supposed impact craters, instead of being an asteroid hitting the Earth or the moon or whatever, they are actually like little geysers, little implosions where you've got tectonic activity happening and you know, like let's look right here. This is on the moon. It's called a bullseye double crater. Now, what are the odds of two asteroids hitting the exact same spot?
It's got to be at least as close as the same percentage as like lightning hitting the same place twice, right?
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, these double craters are not an uncommon thing. So here's a double crater all over the place. This one's Ganymede right here. It's not a double impact. It's not God playing darts. It's uh, it's it's kind of like a volcano going off twice. Now, how hard is that to believe? You know,
Right.
one geyser erupting twice.
Well, Old Faithful does it every
Yeah,
every hour
45
or
minutes
something.
or something. Yeah. Let's see here. That's important, but this is a series of supposed impact craters, but they are along a fault line,
Huh.
and it's pretty compelling evidence that this is tectonic related, not impact related. So that's why they're all along that fault line. And at the flood, it was the tectonic party of all time.
Well,
Those
dude,
plates,
and
yeah.
the other thing, just looking at the picture of the one there that shows where all those impacts were that stretch between Illinois, Missouri, and Kansas, that's oddly close to Adamon Diamond in that area.
Yeah, that sure is. Uh, yeah. Um, so there's a lot of evidence you can get into to point to how these are not impact, but they are in fact uh, more watery implosions.
Right.
Let's see here.
Well,
The
and the other thing I've thought, Nate, and maybe you can help me out on this, is that if it is crater impacts, right? If those are crater marks, where did the where did the meteorite go?
Yeah, that's a big problem with the and a lot of
Right?
these meteorites people find that are like, hey, I found a rock from outer space, like amazing. Hate to break it to them, but a lot of those were actually just shot out from underground.
Right.
Um, yeah, and that's the Arizona hydrocrater is this big famous one that they try to use to date the age of the Earth. But yeah, there's no impact glass because you would have had so it wasn't a high speed impact, and it wasn't a low speed impact because there was no fragments. There's just problem after problem. Um, and you can demonstrate these as being hydrocraters.
Yeah, and I always thought, okay, if something that large struck the earth, right? So obviously if it's leaving a crater that's not an airburst, it's actually making contact with the soil. We should see, like you were saying, the glass, but we should also see remnants of that meteorite. And you just don't ever see, like this, inside the Arizona hydro, in that Arizona crater, like a mound there that would represent, hey, there's the meteor that struck.
Yeah, that's a pretty big problem, and they'll do all kinds of creative stuff to get around it. And you can even look at, if you set off an underground bomb versus a rocket that strikes a target,
Right.
it'll show you again, all the patterns that you need to know to be able to differentiate between an underground situation and an overground. And so the problem is there's some theories that should have died a long time ago, but they're sticking around. And that's when I turn and say it's got to be supernatural evil because some of these things should have died a long time ago and they're sticking around.
Gotcha.
Um, so this is something that we referred to earlier. This is some more examples of some of those hydro fountain possibilities.
Cenotes.
Yeah. Deep cylindrical pits and um the like. Um, yeah. So the when the continents buckle at the beginning of the flood event, water from beneath uh, exits. And that's another thing is the main thing that comes out of a volcano is not lava, it's actually water vapor. The Mount St. Helens eruption, there was no lava, um, but there was an epic amount of mud because of all the water coming out. It wasn't just from the snow on the top of the mountain. That was what they tried to say, but it's not nearly enough. Um,
Mm,
Let me see here. So some more important flood points are that you've got mountains with marine fossils, Mount Timpanogos, the Alps, the Everest, the Himalayas. Um, and we have our satellites. So our satellites are telling us that mountains move a little bit, as do the
right.
continents. They move a little bit horizontally
Yep.
each year, but our satellites are saying there's no vertical movement. And when an evolutionist looks at these marine fossils up on, miles high mountains, even Everest, the ridge of these mountaintops, they'll say, well, I guess that mountain came up really slowly. And it used to be on the ground level, and it really slowly came up, and there's some leftover fossils up there. Now, there's multiple problems with that. Obviously, one of them would be um, erosion would have wiped out a lot of those fossils a long time ago if it was that long. Another is based on our satellite readings, mountains aren't coming up. So there's two things with mountains. One is there was mountains in the beginning of the creation. I know some people will disagree with that, but from what we can tell, there was. and there's mountains without fossils in them, the granite mountains and such. Granite rock is basically creation rock.
Okay.
Um, and so these mountains, all the mountains that you see, they were either lifted, they could have been lifted up in the flood or created in the flood from the plate interactions. But we don't need to say that it was a shallow flood. And we can't say that it was a shallow flood because we know the recipe for fossils requires a certain amount of water pressure. Now there's some minor exceptions. You'll hear of the odd story of, a fossil being formed. But the vast majority and the mass extinctions and all of this, for all those fossils to be made, you had to have the depths of waters that we've been talking about.
Right.
We also see on Mars, the surface of Mars, there's these rounded pebbles and cobbles and these vast flat plains. And so the researchers say, yeah, this was a floodplain, massive flooding over here, because that's how these kind of rocks are made, and these flat plains as well. Um, Also, flat plains are another evidence that the sediments, instead of just crust banging against each other, making mountains all over the place, we have massive, totally flat plains. And those flat plains are another evidence that a lot of the sediment was put down in a watery situation where the water flattened everything out. So
Gotcha.
anyway, they're recognizing this mega flood on Mars, but they're not willing to uh, point to this on Earth. One important part of that is that on Earth, we have a atmosphere that makes a lot of vegetation and a lot more wind and erosion. So it does kind of cover up the fact that there was the flood. It's not quite as obvious as this Mars massive floodplain. You've got some similar things where scientists are acknowledging that things like the English Channel were carved out by a fast, powerful, massive flood that was 100 times greater than the Mississippi River, probably much larger, that there was a catastrophic erosion. These are recent discoveries because of higher resolution sonar data previously unavailable to make the 3D high quality images. You've got places like the Scoblands, Washington.
The
You've got,
Washington Scablands.
yeah, you've
Yeah,
got places.
that's fascinating. I did a survey up there once, and I can tell you just from being there, and if you just look at it, it looks like it was absolutely bombarded by fast, violent moving water.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And you've got a lot of the time when you've got the mountain folding, where a lot of the layers are folded and on a angle and everything, not just flat layers, but all folded. That uh, is from when that a lot of those mountains were pushed around um, during the flood time and bended. It wasn't slow creeping up to that.
Right.
Um, So you've got all kinds of place. They also acknowledge that over just the American continent that they used to have hundreds of feet higher of was it? I think it was hundreds of miles. I don't know if I put the slide in here. Oh yeah, here it is. Several hundred. The sea level was several hundred feet higher than today, and if it was that much higher in America, it would have likely been everywhere else too. So you've got all over the world, they're admitting flooding. For dinosaurs, they're admitting that it was a flash flood. It was a sweeping abnormal flood. And one really big evidence for um, the dinosaurs dying at the flood is that um, so first off, people don't think that the dinosaurs lived with humans, and they think they were a really long time ago. But if the Earth itself is only, back to Adam is 6,000 years, and around then, maybe 7,000 years of creation, if we apply what Peter says about one day being 1,000 years. So I think a 7,000 years creation is a really valid theory, and that's universal model talks about that too. But these dinosaur bones, there's lots of oddities that point to massive flooding. You've got deposits of dinosaurs being, you know, without their young, they're running away. The young didn't make it as far as they did. You've got um, bones just snapped in half, but they're not like gnawed on by scavengers. They're this big sweeping massive flood graves where we've got just thousands of animals. Um, so the scientists are admitting that comet theory is on the way out, flood theory is on the way in when it comes to dinosaurs. When it comes to the fossil record, you basically, they'll have their geologic column and say the Cambrian and all these different times of the deep time of the Earth, but they will admit that there's a time when there's hardly any fossils, and then boom, there's just a chuck ton of fossils. And that would be the flood time, the Cambrian explosion, the Great Dying is what they call it. And um, it's like there was no fossils, virtually nothing, and then boom, everything, all the large animals, all this just showed up. And that's a big problem for them is how is there that gap? There's not a slow evolution, it's a big gap.
So I agree with you 100%. I have a good friend who is, I'm not going to name him and I'm not going to name the university he's at. I will say that it's in the Intermountain West, but he's a geologist. And I was talking to him just a couple months ago, and he was commenting that right now this idea of a cataclysmic flood is gaining some traction. He said, but the problems that they're encountering right now is that you have a certain branch that just won't let the old narrative die, no matter how much evidence there is to the contrary to support this cataclysmic flood idea. The my question for you on this is, how do you explain the dates they come up with then with like carbon dating and that sort of stuff, right? Because that, I find that so much of their arguments for this old earth kind of paradigm rests on the science of carbon dating. Can you speak to the veracity of that at all?
So there's some really big problems there. And it's part of it's tied to, when you carbon date something, it's saying how long ago was this created. When they do that with a rock, it's how long ago since it was formed from a melt, which they were never formed from a melt. So that shuts down the whole branch of that. But yeah, I mean, carbon dating, there's a chapter on this in the book and all that. But there's a army of creation scientists. Dean has a lot of really amazing stuff, but the problems with carbon dating, you can bash on carbon dating fairly easily. There's all kinds of texts that have been written about all the problems with that. You'll send in a sample of the same thing in two different bags a month apart from each other, and you'll get totally different dates. So there is just these vast inaccuracies, like and they'll give you this quote unquote absolute date, but this was somewhere ranging from 10,000 to 5 million years, and it's not very absolute.
No.
Um, but this is another place where the water planet Earth is so important that a lot of creation scientists are missing on. The hydroplanet model is not really taught anymore, because we've so far bought into that as being a reality, which James Hutton came up with it 200 years ago. So it's a fairly new thing, but it's so ingrained now. But if you don't have the melt in the beginning, you can't have the radiometric dating at all. Even if you have a precise instrument, it's on a flawed premise that everything came from a melt and that you're dating back to see how long ago that melt was. But yeah, and when it comes to like human civilization, we can take, cave drawings and date them to say, okay, this was a 50,000-year-old drawing. However, the only written records, you can only go back to 4,000 BC. Um, as far as like records where people actually wrote down and indicated dates and all that, you got 4,000 BC, nothing past that. So we can speculate and we can do, argon dating, carbon dating, we can do all kinds of dating techniques and come up with all kinds of different answers. But that's one strong thing, that there's no written records past 4,000 BC. But it's not in this presentation, but later in volume 2 is where it talks a lot about that of universal model. It talks about all the different ways that people have tried to date the Earth, like 25 different methods, radiocarbon being just one of those, and how they all just come up with these extremely different dates. And you might notice that the Earth keeps getting older,
Right.
like really fast getting older. And it's the same thing with like Big Bang. They used to say Big Bang was a small amount, it was like 100 square miles of mass imploded and exploded and blah, blah, blah. No, it was actually like, a square mile of mass. No, it was they get smaller, smaller, and now they're like, oh, it was nothing exploded. Um, anyway, but yeah, that's kind of the carbon dating is kind of a whole nother big old topic.
And the only reason I bring that up is because that's often a, a arrow in their quiver that they will use to kind of push back against this idea of a global flood, right? Is they'll say, well, we have all this carbon dating that tells us that it's much older than that. But as I looked at it, it doesn't look like it's reliable. It doesn't look like it's really repeatable, like you were saying, even from the same sample. And so when you get that kind of error that's built in to the model, that leaves a lot of room for a lot of speculation.
Yeah. It's kind of like the Bible flood is a pinpoint that we can use, and then we can build off of that, because it was 4,500 years ago. That's when this worldwide flood happened, and that's when every creature died, and
Right.
you know human population got a reset.
Well, and
um
if I'm not mistaken, even even those same scientists will admit that about 4,500 years ago, there was a bottleneck in human population.
yeah, yeah, that would be the Cambrian, mass extinction. Yeah. And it's like, okay, well, the Cambrian, no, it wasn't X 100 million years, it wasn't 600 million years ago, it was actually 4,000 years ago. And
Right.
that really does a number on the age of the Earth. um so another important thing with flood geology is looking at some small scale things that you can translate into bigger scale. So this is a sewer pipe, and with an earthquake in Japan, you can it's come up and this crust around it has collapsed, but it's kind of stayed intact because it's made of that harder concrete.
Right.
And you can see this is what happens on a really big scale with a lot of our things, like we are talking about Monument Valley, and a lot of those just you know um places where something just sticks up. You could have entire mountain ranges that were hydro fountains, and they solidified and the surrounding sediment eroded because it wasn't as hard, and left over today you've got this mountain range. So
Right.
it's hard to comprehend the mega scale of the water that came out at the flood and of what it made. um Here's you know hydro sand. This is a bunch of sand spewing out. When you look at the Colorado Plateau, it's this big area of a different color than the rest of the United States. And those sands were all spewed out during the flood. And you've got these hard formations, that are leftover hardened pipes from it. But the Grand Canyon itself, like we were talking about earlier, it's this layer after layer after layer of sediment that was deposited in a short amount of time because there's no organic layers between them and no fossil evidences of plant and animal life between them. So we know they were laid down in a short amount of time. The flood would be the ideal time to where those sediments are getting shot out, and then the Grand Canyon itself, an earthquake, you know, open it right up for us. And there's some other theories, but the strongest one is the earthquake theory. Um, so let me see here. Uh, Talked about that. A bunch of these pipes, um, leftovers, Monument Valley, even these big mountains in the background, those could be massive hydro fountains. Um, we talked about how the Grand Canyon is just peppered with uh, seismic activity. The canyon itself is one big fault line. Here you've got the rim differences and 1,200 feet height, obvious evidence of an earthquake. Um, so this is evidence of two things. One, that the Grand Canyon is young, and two, which makes the Earth young, and two, that these sediments, if they're deposited quickly, what is the event in the history of the Earth that deposited those quickly? And um, I guess you could have some of this at creation as well, but flood and creation are the two times where you've got the all this going on. Um,
And just from scripture, I tend to think that things like the Grand Canyon and that sort of thing are products of the flood. And the reason for that is that when you hear about in Revelation and stuff like that, where the earth is taking on more of its paradisical glory, it talks about the mountains being made low and the valleys being raised up and things being smooth, which just lends me to, okay, if this is if this is the restoration of the earth, so to speak, the celestialization of the earth, it's probably going back to its former and perfected state, right?
yeah, I guess another time that there could have been some major changes is the fall of Adam.
Yep.
Maybe there was some major seismic activity that created mountains at that time too.
Yep.
Um, but as far as like a smooth earth, I'm not sure. I mean, we've got mountains low and valleys up. It's like some places going down and other places going up, but I don't know on that. Um, uh, yeah. This is the Waimea Canyon in Hawaii, and it's another example of a seismic earthquake creating this scenario, which it gives us evidence for the United States one being made the same way.
Right.
Um, this is pretty important right here. This is Lake Powell. When we put in the water for Lake Powell, we didn't put it all the way, you know, up here. We put it down here. But in the history of Lake Powell, obviously there was water that came through and pummeled this pretty hard at one point because it's got this smoothed area here. Now the top area is a rough area. Um, this would mean exposure during a quaking time and where other surrounding sediment gets eroded. So this was covered in the flood, but this top part was exposed by a quake, and at some point, water came in and smoothed this out. Part of the reason this is important is because the Grand Canyon, does it look like the top part or the bottom part? The top part's more rigid,
Right.
and the bottom part's more smooth. So
Right.
the Grand Canyon probably looks more like the top part, um,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that the Grand Canyon wasn't carved by water. If the Grand Canyon was carved by water, the walls would look more like this smooth area.
Right.
Um, yeah, so some more of these fountains. I think, yeah. some more of
I'm
these.
fascinated by these water pipes, as you call them.
Yeah.
Is there anything other than their shape that you could point to and say, "Oh, that's what that was. That was a hydro fountain."
There's a couple things. One is the different color. They're often
Right,
a
I
different
remember
color
that.
than the surrounding area. Another is what is in the surrounding area. Is the surrounding area, why is it this thing? And then the surrounding area is totally different.
Right.
So that points to this being a very different formation from underground, that there was some underground activity, um, which eventually you've got this solidified and the surrounding stuff being eroded away. So those are a couple points. It goes into a lot more detail in the text on like the composition of these versus the composition of surrounding layers. Um, and there's lots of, because you could say, was it just lava, not water? But there's plenty of evidences um of water passages and mud and sand, not just lava. And you've got a stark contrast. I think it's Oh, here's a really important point. This is a mud fountain. So mud fountains like these are at the bottom of the ocean worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So these are basically they're volcanoes underwater, which just spit out a bunch of mud. And those are another big source for
Okay.
that. Mount St. Helens itself, you could call a mud fountain because that's the main thing that came out of it. Um, yeah. So this is you could figure out the date of this, the Badlands mud fountain. It erodes this whole area about an inch per year, but um, at the same time they turn around and say it's 5 million years old, but it would be 79 miles tall 5 million years ago if that was the case, which is just an astronomically big number. That the mountains are 5 miles tall at most, and so 70 miles tall is just ridiculous.
Right.
Um, but based on what erosion we can see, this uh, has been eroding down about 300 feet. And so if you calculate 300 feet at an inch per year, that's about 4,000 years ago. In other words, this was all deposited 4,000 thereabouts years ago, and it's been going down by erosion since then,
Right.
which matches up with our flood time as well.
Yeah.
Um, This is artist's palette. It's this very colorful formation. You see stuff like this. This green and purple, it didn't erode from anywhere. There's no rivers that carried sediment here. This had to have come from underneath the ground. And again, different colorings by the microbes under the earth. Um, there's some similar things. We talked about some of these dikes. Now, here's a big hitter for them being shooting out water, not just lava
Right.
traveling through. It's because there's rounded pebbles and smooth cobbles like fluvial gravel, okay, that are flowing through these. There's some other ones in the book that I didn't put in here, but where there's skipper rocks and they're lined, these dikes are lined with these skipper rocks, and it's evidence that there was water smoothing them out, coming through there. So that's a
God.
pretty important thing. Let's see. Lava flow wouldn't have this, if this was lava, this dike was made by lava. There are some dikes made by lava, but this clean cut and all this, your lava is looking a lot different.
Right.
Um, this is kind of cool. See all these black boulders on this hill right here? They're very different than the surroundings stuff. How did they get here without mixing with the other rocks? You could say, well, maybe they rolled on in on a glacier, but it's this unique little deposit right here, and there's not like a big old trail of where they
Right.
would have come from. These came from under the earth. They were shot out from under the earth. They are unrounded, so that's another evidence that they didn't travel here from afar. They would have been more rounded if they did. So you've got these scenarios where you've got uh, all over the world, you've got these fountains where rocks are coming out, sand's coming out, and epic amounts of water. Now, one of the reasons that I'm saying epic amounts of water come out of these pipes is what's coming out of the volcanoes. It's epic amounts of water vapor. But again, in this discussion that we've had tonight, we've not like put all the nails in the coffin for the water earth. But when you have the water earth established, it's easy to see that when you do have a deep opening there, a lot of the time what's going to be coming out of it is water because there's so dang much water that, the continents, we're all sitting on water. We dig wells and that's a little bit of an idea, but it's a lot more extensive than just that. Another thing you could say is the sediment size table. You've got missing pebble sizes, meaning that a lot of these rocks were formed in the flood. They weren't just eroded, because if all of our sands, a lot of the sands are flood sands. Because if the sands were all just erosion, you'd have a perfect continuum of gradient size, but you're
Right.
missing some pretty decent, sizes of sand, which means these are created sands, not and there's a lot that goes into that, but we can't just say they were all erosion.
Okay.
Um, let's see here. Hydrothermal activity. Hydrothermal. This is some more of those distinct off-colored areas. Mesquite sand dunes, Death Valley sand, clay. You look at it from the satellite, it's this white patch of in the middle of nowhere. It didn't erode from a white mountain, you know. It didn't
Right.
get brought in by a river. This is from underground. And evidencing that there's so much stuff that comes up from underground. Some more discolored. There's an important one I wanted to show to you. Another element of it is that what holds these together is quartz. Quartz is the most common cement in sandstones. Something that's established in the text is that quartz doesn't come from a melt. This
Right.
sandstone rock here wouldn't be held together if this isn't a supposed igneous rock. This is cemented together by quartz, and if you melt quartz, first off, how did that even get there if the earth is from a melt instead of a
Right.
water-based creation? So all over the place, you got these formations that are held together by quartz cement that require a watery creation. And again, you're able to make that in that perfect recipe that the flood provides. These arches, why isn't there debris? National the
Yeah.
these arches. Where's all the debris? So these were more soft material, or even the fully hardened rock, but water comes through, it jets through here, and it carries the debris away with the jet of water.
No, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, no debris. If these were forming slowly over time, we have seen a few arches crumble. 1991, 2008, these arches fell, and yeah, there are debris right there. But where's all the debris for all these others? These weren't forming slowly over time. These were washed right through in the flood.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
It's the topsoil we talked about earlier. How worldwide there's this layer of organic soil, which the amount of, it would take not less than 400 years to do, what was it, like a single inch of topsoil. And then you do the calculations, and you've got, this 9 inches or so. Let's see, what is it? 500 years. Anyway, Sorry, it's almost the brush from that, but it points us right back to flood time as well as before that. Um, you get a few more. This is a alluvial fan. This is a mega alluvial fan. We've never seen an alluvial fan this big being made. We've seen little washouts, like by a little creek, you'll see this little area where it washes out and it'll put the little sort of a fan shape. But the amount of water that must have been flowing through here to make this mega alluvial fan is is just beyond comprehension to us, really, because we've never seen it happen because we weren't
Right.
around when the floodwaters happened. In Mount St. Helens, you got this little rock flow, but this isn't an alluvial fan flow. This wasn't as nearly as much water. Mount St. Helens was um, not nearly as much water as what happened. These are some more of these very possible hydro fountains. Agaltha Peak. You can see this big old opening in the top right here. This big old open pipe right here.
Yeah.
Um, so these are some pretty cool ones. Um, yeah. How was this? Agaltha covered by sediment that eroded away, leaving only the minette mineral behind. There's a lot. This is like the Reader's Digest, definitely version. Um, Liquefaction, where the water under the surface, uh, when you have an earthquake, you can have liquefaction, major incidents, New Madrid fault earthquakes. Um, the survivors said there was water and sand spouting up through fissures or cracks to the Earth's surface. This
How long ago was
liquefaction,
that? How long was the New Madrid earthquake?
I'm trying to remember, but I don't. But it was, obviously
Okay, no sweat.
somewhat
I was
recently.
just curious.
Yeah. This one in India was in 2001. A large earthquake initiated liquefaction, triggering hydro fountains that spouted sand over an area greater than 15,000 kilometers. That's about 10,000 square miles.
Now that one's impressive, and it's
Yeah.
impressive because it's so recent,
Yeah.
right? If something's thousands of years old, you could say, okay, well, maybe the inhabitants, things got passed down wrong, but 2001 is very very recent, and so that should carry a lot of weight in kind of forming your opinion, I would think.
Yeah. These are some recent events that open the door to how we could have colossal scale things like this happening because when you've got basically the bigger the earthquake, the bigger the liquefaction and the bigger the hydro fountains are going to be triggered, the more friction that's going to be, uh, liquefying and rock and sending up stuff. This is the Kobe incident from 1996. In this incident, there was no active volcano, and heat flow studies revealed no significant lateral changes in the temperature before the earthquake. Therefore, we suggest that the anomaly, this is this Journal of Science is saying this, we suggest that the anomaly, the Kobe hypocenter, is not related to a magma reservoir, but rather to the presence of fluids in the crust.
Oh,
Yeah, that's a good one. Um, this is the Chai Chai, if I'm saying that right, earthquake 1999. People said there were huge boulders being flung into the air. This is all without volcanic eruption. This was hydro rock fountain.
hmm.
Um, so again, these really cool structures in nature that we kind of scratch our heads like, how in blazes did that happen? A lot of it can be unlocked with this understanding of these solidified pipes and the surrounding areas not being as uh, solid because they weren't as directly encountered by the pressure water
Right.
uh, unique for that formation. And then so some surrounding area going down, and then some of the pipe itself being pushed up after it hardens. Um, yeah, this is another sand fountain. So a lot of this going on. I think I'll skip that. The big plains. Why are all these big plains happening? The flat plains going on without end is evidence that there was a lot of water smoothing everything out right here, just raking it all smooth there. And so scientists, when they see these massive plains, are like, why? Why do we have plains at all? these massive plains. Um, there's a lot of these columnar formations that we are finding out they are with watery formation. Lava doesn't cool to form these basalt columns. Let me show you a couple examples here. These Devil's Tower, these columns here, the square or cylindrical shapes, that is big evidence that this was formed by water in a watery environment. The Devil's Tower is near in the middle of a collapsed dome. In other words, this is the middle of a basically a volcano, but it's not a volcano because magma doesn't create this kind of stuff, doesn't create this shape of column. And so this was a watery creation because we're finding over and over, like this other thing here. This was in Hawaii, the Puna Ridge, where underwater basalt columns form. And scientists are beginning to recognize the direct evidence of subaqueous column formation, which shows the importance of water and high pressure. So again, when you see this kind of thing, think water and high pressure. This was near three faults. So again, the earthquake triggering. This is the Devil's Post pile. This is Paul Bunyan's wood pile. More of these cylinder. Now particularly these this sort of shape. The Giant's Causeway, Ireland. They got these columnar shapes here from the watery creation, showing that these aren't just. We can't just say that all these dikes, all these columns are made out of magma. There's just a billion reasons why we can't say that, because this typical feature is a subaqueous feature. That's how it forms. We've demonstrated it. And there's the smooth skipper rocks, the rounded pebbles that are all in through them being eroded down by water. So yeah, there's a lot of different emphasis that these were not just all lava pipes and lava created. They like to bend lava for everything, and it's just kind of backwards.
Gotcha. So I think you've done a real good job in explaining the science of how the flood itself could happen. If you're open to it, I would like to just kind of paraphrase the Noah's Ark story here, and then I want to ask some questions based off of that. Are you good with that?
Yeah, that's great.
So God comes to Noah and says, "Look, mankind's gone off the rails. I'm going to hit the reset button, but I'm going to spare you and your family." So Noah builds the ark, and it has very specific dimensions and whatnot. Eventually, of course, everyone mocks Noah, laughs at him, and eventually the rains and those fountains, they burst and they come forward just like you explained here. You did a real good job in that. Raises the ark. Noah and his family are preserved. Do you have any sort of indication on how Noah was able to keep all of those animals from tearing the ark apart?
So a lot of people like to point out that he could have taken baby animals, or at least juvenile animals, and that could include some dinosaurs for all we know. But I mean, I don't know that he would take these vicious animals. I don't know that he took every animal, but
right.
But there does seem that like there was some big old lizard things walking around that some people had to hunt down in a lot of legends.
Right.
That's a really fascinating topic. But yeah,
So
I mean,
do we have? I mean, obviously, we do know that there are some omnivores that will hibernate, right? So I could see some animals just within their natural cycle, if conditions changed, maybe that caused them to go into that kind of state. But is there anything else within nature that we find where animals can kind of enter a catatonic state and be docile?
I don't know about nature, but I definitely know about the Bible. Like, look at Daniel in the lion's den.
Okay.
God can do all things.
That's good. And then when Noah gets off the ark, it's just him and his family, right? I think it says that some of the boys had wives. Do we know Is that has to be the wellspring then again from when humanity springs once again, right?
Yeah, as far as I understand, everyone's geology, Noah's a common father, to everyone post flood.
Let me ask you this question. Do we find any remnants of that Adamic civilization, right? That time when Adam and Seth and Noah and Methuselah were all on the earth.
In other words, do we have evidence of pre-flood civilization?
Yeah.
The answer is yes. And there's some stuff about it. The Clovis people, there's a whole chapter on it in Universal Model 2. There's some good stuff there.
So who were the Clovis people? Explain
So
that a little bit.
I'm gonna be honest, that's something that I'm still reading. This is a really
Okay.
big book. So I'm not the perfect savvy, but yeah, I just know that there's some stuff in there, like on these pre-flood civilization a little bit. And I'm pretty sure he has them in America.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
the first time Clovis points are discovered are in Clovis, New Mexico, but they found
yeah,
them all the way on the Delmarva Peninsula out there in Maryland and Delaware and Virginia. So it was expansive, definitely.
yeah, that's an exciting topic, and it can, Latter-day Saint theology talks about, the Garden of Eden in Missouri, um, something to that effect, and you know, uh, there's also he does yeah, so it'll all come together at some point, that's
Right.
the whole goal with the true purpose of education and nature, about education about nature, is it all points us back to theology, to Christianity, to the fullness of the gospel.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
sorry, no, I'm not more savvy on that than I
No,
am.
no, you're good. You're good. This has been awesome.
Yeah,
So let me ask you this. What has studying this done for your testimony?
it has been quite the adventure. I um let me say, before I got into any of this research, I hoped that evolution wasn't true, because that would be a real party pooper on faith, and I would have to do some real big tricks to be happy with faith and evolution. And I had a lot of people talking to me that were like just pulling on me of, come on, man, like, and you know, when are you gonna get it that evolution is how God does things? And I just never felt good about that, and it was deeply disturbing to me. And you don't hear about creation science. I didn't know creation science existed in any way, shape, or form until multiple years into my, college career and all that. But particularly the universal model, like one of my people who, Kent Hovind,
Mm-hmm.
he is a creation science Protestant lecturer who is just really amazing. There's some problems with some creation science ideas, namely that they think the whole creation happened of the universe happened at the same time, which I think doesn't have to be that way. And our theology supports, hey, God's gonna go create this. This is awesome. Okay, hey, let's go create this. Hey, that's cool too. And but but yeah, Kent Hovind, he was a really big influence on me to start me in the right direction. But universal model in particular, I owe so much to that research, because it's really made it a lot more concrete for me, and it's uh very made it very tangible. It's just, I am a lot more at peace in my soul with this kind of research has really helped me go a long way. And let me say that when you have faith, you don't require, like you're saying earlier, as soon as I started to hear that there was an inkling of hope that, oh, the flood is real. Oh, we aren't descended from monkeys. Man, I grabbed onto that instantly. That's true, you know, and I ran with it, and I was blessed to kind of haphazardly find universal model eventually. all this, but are, even if we get a tiny bit of evidence, I mean, it's hard because you get religious people telling you that these crazy ideas. And it's like, gosh, everybody else believes these things. Maybe I'm like a dork for not believing these things, but yeah, I just am at peace with all this.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And that's what I guess we should that's what I think we should take away from this, right? Is that you shouldn't be basing your testimony around scientific evidence, right? We're talking about spiritual things. However, I think once you're rock solid in that testimony, I think all sorts of things come out of the woodwork to bear testimony to what was revealed in scripture, and those stories weren't just stories. Those were events that actually happened. One of the things I find absolutely fascinating about the flood story is that it is all over the world, right? So many cultures. This was a cataclysm that left scars on all sorts of different societies, right? Every society has their flood story. And I think it really points back to the idea that this did happen. And this went down just the way the Old Testament says it did.
Yeah, it creates a bigger, stronger God that is a lot more involved, and it makes faith a lot more real. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, dude, this was awesome. I probably know we didn't cover everything you wanted to cover this time around, but dude, let's do it again.
Yeah, I mean, there's always more, right? But yeah, it was a really great opportunity.
Yeah, no, I had a great time, man. So anything that you really want to cover now that we didn't cover already?
No, I feel like we got a lot of good points made, a lot of good stuff to chew on.
Fantastic. Well, dude, let's do this. Let's plan on, I'll just reach out to you after a little while and we'll do this again because I love talking to you.
Okay. Super appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. All right. Bye, everybody.
You're listening to the Mormon Renegade Podcast.